The Warhammer 40k universe feels alive and vibrant in Spacemarine 2. At its best, the game creates an amazing fantasy of being a Space Marine. At its worst, it feels horrible to interact with and frustrating beyond belief. This range of experiences from fantastic to awful has defined my time with Spacemarine 2. I want to understand how these fantastic experiences are created. I want to understand why the game has failed to keep me engaged for a long term. What makes the gameplay feel utter shit to interact with at times? The short answer to that is that the visuals and especially the environments are incredibly good. The gameplay, while mechanically solid, feels flimsy and incredibly fragile. The gameplay can work, but more often than not I found it to be frustrating, hard to understand and confusing. Spacemarine 2 is a good game, but I think it has some pretty significant flaws. I think the point of the game is to immerse the player into the fantasy of being a powerful Space Marine in the Warhammer 40k universe. The main tool the game uses to sell the fantasy of being a powerful Space Marine is environmental storytelling. In this scene we see the aftermath of a battle between the Imperial Guardsmen and a horde of Tyranids. Their mangled corpses, the ocean of blood, the flies feasting on their remains, the blinking red light in the background, the destroyed tanks and fortifications. These visual elements tells a powerful story of what happened here. Scenes like this sells the atmosphere and setting of Warhammer 40k. The game has great graphics. The explosions and flames look great. The models are detailed with great textures. The lighting is solid. Really, everything about the visual fidelity in this game is fantastic. And that is important in order to sell the fantasy of an established franchise. These types of scenes relies heavily on visuals, and without them this scene would not work. It is really the combination of the sheer scale and the incredible details that makes the visuals as good as they are. This city is massive and it is ridiculously detailed. You can pause this clip at any moment, and even after a couple of minutes you could still find new things in the image. The sheer scale in combination with the absurd level of details makes this city come alive. There are so many stories this environment tells us. The story of the city and how it worked, the story of the battles, and the story of the Grand War taking place. These stories works because of both scale and detail in conjunction. These fuel barrels are a great example of the extra level of detail that this game has gone through in order to sell the world. The pumps and hoses attached to the fuel barrel would not be included in most other games, but I have gone to that extra length here, and that attention to detail matters. It matters a lot. These details means that you can play through a level several times and continue to discover new things all of the time, and I cannot stress how important both the scale and the details are to this game. A significant part of the story is told through the gameplay. You meet Imperial Guardsmen that fight alongside you. You see how they behave in the presence of Space Marines, the reverence they show you. Seeing the tanks and equipment they use in the battle reinforces the fantasy. The Guardsmen do not really matter for the plot. What matters is that they are always there because the Guardsmen are an integral piece of the Warhammer 40k universe and therefore the fantasy. The most important stories happens in the background. Stories you can choose to stop and take in or ignore and continue on your way. You may choose to listen to the speech given by the commander of the Space Marine, or you can choose to ignore it. The speech happens regardless of your choice, and that makes it feel real. The world does not really care about your choices. You are merely a cog in a massive machinery. And that is exactly what you should feel like as a Space Marine. You are merely a servant to the Imperium and nothing more. Being a part of an assault on hordes of chaos reinforces that you are merely a cog in this massive machinery. You are powerful, but still only one of many. Seeing tanks and dreadnoughts at your side as you charge the hordes of chaos feels immersive. The massive chaos demon launches attacks creates a feeling of being small and insignificant. This scene is a perfect example of how the visual elements nails the story, the atmosphere and the setting of Warhammer 40k to perfection. One of the most important things about this game is to immerse you into the universe of Warhammer 40k. That is the purpose of the plot, the story and the characters. It is to sell the universe of Warhammer 40k. You don't actually care that much about what happens in cutscenes as long as it sells the fantasy of Warhammer 40k. All you care about is that you fight as a Spacemarine against the enemies of the Imperium. You don't need to fight against Tyranids or Chaos. You could fight against Orcs as you did in the previous game and the fantasy would still work. In order to sell that fantasy, the cutscenes should hold a high quality in terms of visuals and audio, and the story also needs to make sense. Most of the cutscenes in this game are quite good, and they do what they need to do in order to sell the fantasy of being a Space Marine. The visuals are without a doubt the best part of the game. It is the reason the environmental storytelling works as well as it does. The accessory to visuals is of course audio. While the audio works well enough most of the time, it could have been significantly better. The main issue is that the sound is too flat. It lacks the high highs, the low lows, which makes the sound feel real, dynamic, powerful and with weight behind it. I will change the audio from a small dynamic range to a large dynamic range to showcase what I mean in this clip. The difference in perceived sound quality is massive between these clips. You can see what this looks like in the waveform to the screenshot to the top right, where the orange to the left is the large dynamic range and the blue to the right is the small dynamic range. The peaks of the volume is significantly higher for the large dynamic range and significantly lower for the small dynamic range. But the large dynamic range this game has is not enough. The sound needed to have even more weight and power behind it. The sounds of war and battle feel muffled. Explosions feel weak and distant. Sometimes they didn't even have a sound. This battlefield feels wrong because the audio feels wrong. The correct sounds are playing, but they don't carry as far as you expect them to. Explosions don't feel powerful, the guns are muffled, the fantasy of being immersed into the universe of Warhammer 40k is reduced because of it. And this is by far and away the biggest issue with the sound in the game. The audio is not all bad. The game is really good at changing how sound works based on the environment. Your character's footstep will change depending on what type of surface they walk on, for example. This happens with guns as well. Guns sounds very different in a large cave versus an enclosed corridor. The characters' voices are different when they wear a helmet and when they don't.
This is not the site of a Mechanicus macro weapon.
An excavation site.
Indeed. Our path leads down.
Then why would they kill Nozick?
I do not know, nor do I wish to speculate. We are here to end this folly, and so we shall.
The voice acting makes the Spacemarine feel determined and powerful. These subtle details add realism to the game. The voice acting is probably my favorite aspect of the sound in the game, and is probably the one that does the most of work here. And while the audio could have been a lot better, it is not so bad that it ruins the other part of the game. It's just that it doesn't help the game at all either, and I think most of us are able to ignore the issues with the audio if we enjoy the other parts of the game. The game has much bigger issues than the audio. The biggest problem I have with the game is the combat system. The game is really bad at teaching the player how to play the game. The game frequently refuses to teach the player about core gameplay mechanics. The onboarding experience is almost non-existent when it comes to important and core gameplay systems and mechanics. The game then punishes you for not playing correctly, even though the game did a piss-poor job at telling you how to play it. That is what makes this gameplay feel truly awful to interact with at times. Spacemarine 2 includes invulnerability frames on the dodges. It took me over 5 hours to realize that. The first time I realized that I might have invulnerability frames was during my first encounter with a neuron throw. I did not understand that I needed to use the invulnerability frames to dodge, or rather phase through the shockwaves. I did not expect it because Space Marines should not be able to phase through objects based on how they looked and my understanding of the lore. I did not expect it because the game never told me, which it really should have. It should not take me over 5 hours of gameplay before I understand that a core gameplay mechanic exists. The game includes the mechanic of perfect parry and dodges, which means you dodge and parry at a specific window. Frankly, I can't tell you when the window is apart from knowing after trial and error. If you succeed, the enemy will either be staggered or you can perform a gunshot to do a significant amount of damage. Being able to perform both perfect parries and dodges are crucial to defeat enemies, especially at higher difficulties or threat levels. Which is why it is insane that you can remove the entire parry mechanic if you choose a weapon with defense blocking. I expect a weapon that has the description defense blocking to excel at, well, defense, while a name such as fencing would be the more offensive option. The balance would probably be a mix between offense and defense. Turns out that is complete bullshit. Fencing means you have a large parry window, balanced means you have a medium parry window, and blocking means you don't have a parry window at all if the game is to be trusted. I don't understand why defense is not called parrying, because that is really what this metric changes. Without realizing, I had changed my weapon to blocking. Parrying suddenly stopped working for me in some missions. I assumed that I was just being bad. I assumed I missed all of the parrying. But it turned out that the weapon I selected disabled this crucial mechanic, and I did not even realize that it happened. There should be zero fucking way the players can make this sort of mistake by accident. You should not be able to remove one of the core pillars of the gameplay by accident. It also took me a long time to understand how animation cancelling works in this game. You can interrupt melee and ranged attack animations when you parry, but not when you dodge for some reason. When you commit to either a parry or a dodge, you are stuck in that animation until it is completed. I don't understand why parrying and dodges needs to work differently when it comes to animation cancelling. They are basically the same mechanic. They prevent damage in some sort. And it is super confusing when you learn the game, especially when you consider that the game does not really tell you about animation cancelling in the first place. You have to figure this out on your own or do research outside of the game. The game uses dodge and parry indicators quite heavily. While the game absolutely needs to use the dodge indicators to indicate attacks can't be parried, the rest of these indicators should probably have been removed. The indicators are ridiculously inconsistent, both in terms of which attacks they show up for, but also in terms of their timing. The Hellbrute has a powerful attack where it raises its hammer into the air to charge it. This attack is easy to see once you understand it. The visuals are very good here. But this is an unblockable attack, you need to dodge it. But the dodge roll shows up about half a second before the attack hits you. I'm not sure if the intention is to make sure that the player activates invulnerability frames, but that would be very inconsistent with how this indicator works otherwise. If you're supposed to react to it by getting out of the way, then you will not be able to get out of range in time. The Chaos Spawn has a parry indicator that shows up about 2.5 seconds before it hits you. If you hit the parry button when the indicator shows, you will finish the parry way before the attack hits you. There is zero reason to have this indicator here. Just rely on the great animations instead. These indicators makes it harder to understand and learn the game as well. When I started the game, I did not bother dodging ranged attacks or parrying the regular melee attacks. The lack of indicators baited me into believing that dodging and parrying was not part of the core gameplay loop outside of these indicators. That is of course wrong. There are a lot of powerful ranged attacks that you need to dodge in order to not take a significant amount of damage. But they don't have an unblockable indicator on them, even though they can't be parried. Why not? This is yet another inconsistent usage of the orange dodge indicator. While the game tells you that you can parry regular attacks, I forgot about that. I assumed the main use case for parrying was when the blue parry indicator showed up. I assumed wrong, obviously, but that also means that the game felt a lot worse for me until I realized that. The indicators does way more harm to the game than good, and I think most of them should be deleted with the exception of dodge indicators that is absolutely necessary. There is of course also the argument that they need to highlight powerful enemies that happens outside of your cone of vision, and I'm fine with those, but you don't really need indicators when you're looking at an enemy in my opinion. These types of issues are of course not limited to the core gameplay mechanics. It happens when you try a new weapon or a new class. You make assumptions about how the game works, and you are often wrong because the game seems to be making an active effort to fuck you over by obscuring information. Spacemarine 2 is in one part a Souls-like game focused on parrying and understanding enemy attack patterns. It is another part Horde shooter where you are overwhelmed by enemies. The Souls-like part of the game works well when there are a limited amount of enemies on the screen. The Horde part works great when there are few enemies you need to duel and you can mostly focus on the grunts. The challenge this game has is how these systems should be merged together, and I don't think they've succeeded fully on this. The game does not seem to know how to handle situations where there are multiple strong enemies trying to fight you at once. The game probably needed to have a better AI system to stop the enemies from attacking you all at once and allow you to deal with one of them at a time. And the game doesn't really do that. The game allows all of the enemies to attack you at once. What this can lead to is the frustrating tendency of getting stun-locked by a group of enemies. If you miss a single parry or a dodge once, and every enemy hits you and staggers you, then they hit you again, and suddenly you lost all of your health. The game can punish you harshly if you make a single mistake, and sometimes it feels impossible to avoid these mistakes or break out of these stun locks. What this leads to is that I try to manage the flow of the game more actively. I have to manage the enemy AI to prevent them from grouping up on me in a way that I can't handle, and I hate that I need to do that. That brings me out of the fantasy of being a Spacemarine and into the management simulator experience, which I don't really want out of this game. The Horde-based combat system also makes it harder to learn how to deal with the Souls-like parry system because there is so much going on at once. There are always a ton of enemies on the screen. There is always a lot of shit going on in the background. When you're new to the game, it is very difficult to keep track of everything and judge which enemies to focus and how to approach them. This is yet another barrier to the gameplay that the game is pretty bad at managing. Despite all of these complaints, I think the combat system can be amazing when it works. But it is really hard to make it work. But when it works, it can feel really good. Getting it to work takes an absurd amount of work from the players. You breathe at this gameplay wrong and it collapses. The game is more often than not frustrating, clunky, unnatural, unresponsive and confusing, especially when you're learning the game. These issues leads to a combat system that feels awful to interact with far too often. If you manage to learn the game, the combat system can feel pretty good at a mechanical level. But the most important question remains, does the combat system sell the fantasy of being a Space Marine? I think the combat system has the potential to sell that fantasy, provided that you understand how the combat system works and play the game exactly like intended. There is no room for player deviation from the intended experience. The problem is that it takes a lot of effort from the player to learn the game and to understand how they're supposed to interact with it. There are so many pitfalls and potential ways you can fuck up the experience if you play it wrong. The combat fantasy is very flimsy, it is incredibly easy to disturb it. Ammo management feels really shit when you're a new player, for example. You don't know where all of the ammunition caches are. You often run out of ammunition because you miss them. This is the easiest to notice when you play the heavy, as you don't have access to a strong melee attack. Your focus changes from killing enemies to preserving ammunition wherever possible. That makes it feel like I'm playing a management game. I'm not immersed into the fantasy of being a Space Marine. And even when I understand where the ammunition caches are, I risk running out of ammunition if I play at a threat level that is too high. You need to select the difficulty to match your gear, levels and skills in order to have a good time. The game suggests a minimum class level for the different threat levels. While that gives you an indication of what you need, it tells you nothing about the weapons and perks you should have. And the game probably needed to have a combined power level that accounted for everything you can bring into the mission. Weapon levels, weapon perks, class levels and so forth. And I think it can be tricky to understand what threat level you can engage with as a new player. You want to engage with a high threat level that is just right, not too low, but not too high either. There are a lot of incentives for the players to select the highest threat level they can handle. Weapon experience, weapon variant experience, and artifacts are all better if you complete a higher threat level mission. The progression speed and your access to more power is sped up significantly if you complete more difficult missions. The gear has 4 different tiers, which significantly increases the power of your weapons. You really want higher tier weapons if you want to feel powerful. In order to get to that power, you need green, purple and orange artifacts to upgrade your weapons to the next tier. In addition to that, you need to get experience to level up weapons to reach that tier, and you need experience in different weapon variants to get perk points. This focus on progression made me lose focus of the core gameplay and fantasy. I lost myself in the chase of progression because I wanted to feel like a powerful Space Marine. This is obviously a problem of my own making, but the game has created incentives for that to happen. Because I focused on the progression system, I sometimes went into a mission with a threat level that was far too high for me. I ended up being a burden to my teammates because my gear was not good enough. This is after all an online game, and that means you have to deal with humans, in both good and bad ways. I have played with high level players in my missions that tore through the enemies by themselves. I've had low level players that had no idea what they were doing that caused me to lose the mission. Both of these cases feels really shit to interact with. It breaks my fantasy of being a Space Marine. I feel pathetic and worthless because I'm objectively less powerful and useful compared to the higher level teammate. I feel frustrated and angry when my teammates causes me to lose the mission. I really think the game needed to be better at managing threat level and make it easier to choose the correct difficulty. The fantasy only works when the difficulty is right after all. The concept of robust design seems to be completely absent from this game. The gameplay system feels brittle, fragile and flimsy. If the player handles it the wrong way, it shatters. There are a lot of ways you can fuck up the gameplay. That makes it pretty hard to get into the fantasy of being a Space Marine during the gameplay. The fantasy exists, but it is way too difficult to get to. It very much feels like the developers have failed to put themselves into the shoes of the players, to understand that not everyone will understand how the combat system works by themselves. that not everyone will understand how the progression system works by themselves. It seems to me that the developer have assumed that a player will be fine to just figure out the correct gameplay loop by themselves. It seems like the developer have ignored any possibility of the players trying to play the game in a different way than they intended. Let's summarize Space Marine 2 as a game. To reiterate, I think the point of the game is to sell the fantasy of being a Space Marine, to immerse the player into the Warhammer 40k universe. That is done exceptionally well through environmental storytelling. That part of the game is downright incredible. It is truly impressive what they have achieved here. But when it comes to the gameplay, this is much more about the subjective preferences we have and our own abilities to deal with bad communication from the game. The gameplay can work and be amazing, but it also feels completely shit to play at times. Where you land is probably a flip of the coin. Personally, I have landed somewhere in the middle where I'm fine with it, but I'm not excited enough to continue playing the game as a live service game. I've played the game for 35 hours and I feel done with the game now. There is of course a lot I don't know about the game, the combat and the progression systems. I don't claim to be an expert here either, and this video has not really been a criticism of these systems at a mechanical level. This video focuses more on why it is frustrating to learn the combat system, how it is annoying to interact with the game's systems and mechanics, which may break the fantasy, which is really the important part, how the gameplay might fuck up the fantasy. I hope you got something out of this video. Leave some comments if you have some thoughts on the game or the video. I appreciate constructive criticism on the video. What did you like and what did you dislike? Thank you for watching.